Hello and welcome. Coming up, does the government have a plan at last to end the long years of stagnation? I'll ask the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. One of the world's most respected economists and investors, Mohamed El-Erian, should be able to give us an answer. Anushka and her genius chatbot friend Deep Screeny have marked Reeves' sums.
Yes, I'll tell you just how many trees the Chancellor will have to plant if she wants to offset all that airport expansion.
And trying to distinguish pesky weeds from green shoots, the former Tory chairman Jake Berry and expelled Labour candidate Faiza Shaheen. Watcher. Before the election, the Prime Minister and Chancellor insisted their #1 ambition was spurring growth. It hasn't worked out. The mildly growing economy they inherited in July has reverted to Britain's flat-lining type, partly because Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner have heaped additional costs on businesses with their £25 billion employer national insurance increase and a raft of new employment restrictions. They wanted the engine of the economy to be turbocharged and then filled it with sticky syrup. Today, though, Rachel Reeves, who for months did a passingly decent impression of Eeyore, claims to be the most cheerful person in Britain. She's discovered what she hopes will be economic Viagra. What are the odds? The backing for a third runway is largely performative. She's telling international investors in a world reset by Donald Trump that the UK is open for investment and won't be hidebound in its economic bets by climate change targets. But given that a formal development plan won't even be agreed till the end of the Parliament, the chances of climate warriors like Ed Miliband feeling they have to resign their cabinet jobs in protest are slim. And I'm not betting on anyone alive today ever actually touching down on that third runway. By contrast, turning Oxford and Cambridge into a supercluster of high-tech businesses, new housing and train links is practical and should make us richer. Though, if you live in the northeast, it's reasonable to ask whether this government has given up on closing the UK's grotesque regional inequalities. One more thing. The Prime Minister said this morning in The Times that taking a scythe to regulations that stunt growth is his equivalent, he says, of Thatcher's deregulation of finance and Tony Blair's embrace of globalisation. Nice idea, not plausible. Anushka.
Thank you. I'm very much hoping to be alive when that third runway gets built. Now, we are, of course, talking about the Chancellor today. She is quite focused on that one issue. She actually used the word growth 51 times in her speech today, and here is why it is on her mind. This is GDP, or the size of our economy, which was chugging along quite nicely, but has pretty much flatlined since COVID. No growth in August, September or October last year, and then just 0.1% in November, the most recent data. So low growth and a growing population, which means that we feel this in our pockets. This is what would have happened to wages if they had carried on growing at the rate we saw before the 2008 recession. They would have reached here. But instead, the average weekly wage is £278 below that, which might explain why folk aren't feeling that positive right now. An Ipsos poll asked people, how would you describe the state of the economy? 32% say very poor, rising to 77% if you add in fairly poor. Is there faith in Rachel Reeves herself? As of last week, not really. 42% say she's been doing either a fairly bad or a very bad job. Just over 41% either don't know or say her performance has been neither good nor bad. Only 13% say fairly good and 4% say very good. So she has a lot to turn around.
Great, thank you so much, Anushka. Now, I'm just going to turn to my distinguished colleagues. Faiza, I'm going to kick off with you. As an LSE economist, but also somebody who's been immersed in politics, did you hear anything today that you think will significantly increase the growth rate? And secondly, did it sound Labour to you?
Well, firstly, a lot of what she announced is very long-term, and it's fine to have, we need an infrastructure plan. But what I would say is that a lot of this is old ideas. She needed to do a speech today that speaks to the bad market reaction that she had after her budget. To me, third runway, Oxford to Cambridge, as well as being a bit old, I mean, especially the third runway, what kind of growth do we want to have? And these simple questions are not being asked. Just this whole growth without thinking about who it's going to affect, being really purposeful. I mean, this is the thing that we've learned about growth. Unless you're very clear about which industries, what part of the country, low, middle-income people, it's not going to happen. In fact, what is going to happen is that inequality is going to grow. This didn't sound like Labour because, as we saw in Davos as well, is that they are backtracking even on some of the progressive things that they were doing on, say, non-DOMs. The climate, they'd gone in very strong. I'm sure Ed Miliband is not happy today. Essentially, this kind of wipes out a lot of the work that he could, if it does come about, if it does wipe out a lot of that. And I think, again, there's no social justice element. Like, where are we hearing that the regional disparities in this country are huge, and the biggest announcements are really London and Oxford and Cambridge.
Yeah. So, Jake, I mean, do you think there was anything in this that a sensible Tory party could actually oppose?
I mean, it's hard to. There's quite a lot of good stuff in here. I really welcome the third runway. We actually tried to fast-track that. Sorry, pardon me, as a Conservative government in 2019-20. We failed to do so. That's a mistake. We should have done it. The Oxford-Cambs corridor, which is called the Arc of Prosperity, is an idea that we came up. And some of the growth zones they've talked about in North Wales are a continuation of Conservative policies.
Not a lot in your neck of the woods, for your neck of the woods. And to pick up on, on Faiza's point, both parties are committed to narrowing regional inequalities, and many would say this widens those regional inequalities.
Well, Andy Burnham said that, didn't he, when it first leaked that Rachel Reeves was thinking of supporting the third runway at Heathrow. Andy Burnham came out and said, look, you're going to continue to overheat the southeast of England. I want this to succeed, but I do think it's quite cynical because the Labour Party came out after the election. Lots of governments do this. The Conservative government did it in 2010 and said, look, things are really, really bad. In fact, they're much worse than we ever thought. They've spent 7 months talking the economy down. I think they then had a disastrous budget, laying £40 billion on the businesses that they're looking to create this growth. And the economy has gone down and down. It feels like today she's had an attempt at a reset. People are saying she's fighting for a job, but she is, to a large extent, in terms of the short-term growth, solving an economic crisis she's created in Downing Street.
Now, having heard Jake's, Faiza's criticisms of Rachel, we better hear from Rachel, and then we can... Well, I suspect you'll have more, possibly not overwhelmingly positive things to say, because a little earlier, I had a chat with the Chancellor as she was announcing this supposedly really important economic reset, the plan for growth. She was doing it at a remarkable high-tech plant owned by Siemens. It makes the engines for those MRIs that tell us, there's something wrong with us. It was at a plant in Oxfordshire, and this is what she had to say. Chancellor, lovely to see you. You are now the most cheerful person in Britain. When will the rest of the country feel better off?
Well, we're determined. I'm determined to be the Chancellor who turns around living standards and our country's economic performance. And that's why
when will people feel better off?
Well, already in the first 6 months of this Parliament, there's been 2 cuts in interest rates by the Bank of England. Inflation is now at 2.5%, and wages are growing at twice the rate of inflation. Do we need to do more? Absolutely we do. We need to go further and faster in delivering that growth to improve living standards. But in the first 6 months, already wages are rising faster than inflation, and mortgage rates have come down with those interest rate cuts, putting more money in working people's pockets.
But in just the last few days, we've seen Durham University announcing redundancies, we've seen Cardiff announcing job cuts, Sainsbury's announcing job cuts. There isn't the confidence that you would want.
Well, businesses and universities will always have to make decisions about how many staff they can afford based on their financial position. But today I announced the third runway at Heathrow. potentially creating 100,000 jobs. Investment in East Midlands Airport, 2,000 jobs. Investment in an investment zone in Wrexham and Flintshire, 6,000 jobs. So we can trade numbers. The IMF upgraded the forecast for growth for this year for the UK, only the UK and the US in that position. But if the proposition is, do we need to do more? Well, those are some of the facts. But do we need to do more to unlock the amazing potential that our country has to make working people better off? Absolutely we do, which is why today I've made a number of announcements of investments right round the country, leveraging in private sector money, whether that's for housing or a new stadium in Greater Manchester, the Oxcam Growth Corridor to connect two of the best universities in the world with new housing and new transport, or indeed the third runway at Heathrow, which is a national project to help businesses and exporters all over our country access new markets.
And I'm going to come back to that because this stuff is important. But your theory of growth is to cut red tape, eliminate costs to spur investment and growth. But you will hear the same thing that I hear from businesses, which is that this is not coherent at a time when you're increasing their costs through the tax on employment and through employment regulation. So you're facing in both directions in a way that they say doesn't mean you'll get the growth you need.
Our plan for growth is built on three pillars: stability, investment and reform. But stability requires putting our public finances on a firm footing.
But you accept you put costs on them, don't you?
I absolutely accept that there are costs of responsibility, but the costs of irresponsibility, sweeping those problems under the carpet, having unfunded plans, risks doing what Liz Truss did, which is crashing the economy, sending borrowing costs for families and businesses through the roof. I will never play fast and loose with the public finances, because when you do so, it's ordinary workers and businesses that pay the price. So yes, I had to make difficult decisions.
We know that, Chancellor, but you will also have been told, you heard this in Davos, for example, that they say that the employment regulations should at least be phased in over a longer period because they are onerous at a time when you want them to invest more.
Well, we continue to work with business to make sure that we get those employment regulations right. For example,
so you might slow down introduction.
No, but we're making sure we get them right. So, for example, having probation periods so that an employer can take a risk on a new employee and know that if it doesn't work out, they can move on. Making sure that whilst we ban exploitative zero-hour contracts, it's possible for employers to take people on for short-term contracts to cover the holiday period or the busy Christmas time. So making sure that we get that balance right. But security from work is very important. It's important for working people that a job comes with dignity and security. And for too many people in Britain today, that's not the case. And that has economic costs as well, because they lack the confidence to spend in the economy. And also, there's so much evidence now that shows that secure workers are more productive workers as well. So we will continue with that legislation, but always working with business to make sure we get that balance right.
Now, I've lost count of the number of times you've told me you're the Green Chancellor, but with the decision to allow the Heathrow third runway, you're the sooty brown Chancellor now, aren't you?
Well, we've made plenty of investments in the last 6 months through the National Wealth Fund and through planning decisions to unlock investment in clean energy, whether that is solar farms. Ed Miliband has announced more just in the last few weeks, whether it is onshore wind, where we've ended the effective moratorium, or the £20 billion investment alongside BP and Equinor in carbon capture and storage. When it comes to air travel, sustainable aviation and economic growth go hand in hand. We've already introduced a mandate for sustainable aviation fuel. Today I announced £63 million of investment in creating a revenue certainty mechanism to help boost the production of that sustainable aviation fuel in the UK. And the evidence suggests that that can reduce carbon emissions from flying by 70%. So that's what I mean by saying that sustainable aviation and economic growth do go hand in hand.
I mean, there are some who are saying that, in a sense, this is gesture economics, in the sense that you're not even going to get a proposal from Heathrow till the summer. I mean, you may turn out to be the longest-serving Chancellor in history, but you're not going to really be, you can't realistically expect to be in the job when the third runway opens.
So this summer we've asked for proposals to come forward. We want to sign a development consent order in this Parliament, and we want
so
to see
when will we
spades.
see the runway operating in your expectation?
We'll bring the plans will come forward this summer.
10
but because
years,
of the
15 years, 20 years?
Well, look, it will be up to Heathrow to set out their plans. This is a private investment. But what we've said to Heathrow is our planning reforms and our support for the third runway means that we can make progress. There hasn't been a new runway built in the UK since the 1940s. That is absolutely ridiculous. And it speaks to the failure of our country over many years now to build the infrastructure that we need. We're going to do things differently. We're reforming the planning system, reforming the regulation system so that big projects like this can actually get off the ground and the planes can take off.
Now, as you say, the case for joining up Oxford and Cambridge economically is overwhelming, but it is also a very wealthy part of the country. Have you given up on the ambition to reduce the wealth gap between North and South?
Well, just look at what I announced in the budget, the upgrade of the Transpennine route between Manchester and York via Leeds.
But you accept this will increase inequality within the UK,
But
whatever the economic benefits?
If we were doing it on its own, but we're not doing it on its own. We're upgrading the Transpennine route, electrifications of train lines in the north of England, investing in mass transit in West Yorkshire, where I'm an MP. In Leeds, it's the only major city in Europe that doesn't have any sort of mass transit system. We want to change that as the government. So this is not on its own Oxford-Cam growth corridor. This is alongside other investments in other parts of the country. But these two great universities are huge assets to the United Kingdom, are two of the best universities in the world, just 60 odd miles apart, and yet it takes 2.5 hours to get between those two cities on public transport. We're going to cut those journey times and make sure that the towns and cities on that route between Oxford and Cambridge are better connected to the jobs that are being created. And we're doing that by reforming the planning system to make it easier for private investors to build the lab space, to build the housing, to build the water infrastructure and the reservoirs that we need to make a success of this project.
Now, slightly frustrating, we're almost out of time, but let's ask you to sort of canter through a couple of additional ones. How much public money will go into the Old Trafford redevelopment?
That's a scheme that Andy Burnham is leading on,
Sure.
so I can't give you the exact number for that.
But roughly, do you have a rough idea of how much public money?
I can't give you a number on that.
All right. In 2 days' time, you'll probably know, it'll be 5 years since we left the European Union. Again, businesses will have said to you what they say to me is they want us to rejoin the customs union and the single market. Why won't you do that?
Because we're going to deliver on our manifesto promises.
But the Prime Minister says if it's good for growth, you'll do it, and if it's bad for growth, you won't. This is good for growth.
Robert, we went to the country just over 6 months ago with a manifesto, and I know it's unusual for governments to actually want to stick to their manifesto commitments, but we will. But subject to that, we do want to do things to improve our trade relationship with our nearest neighbours and trading partners. That's why we're resetting that relationship to help great British businesses export into the European Union.
Now, unfortunately, I've been doing this job rather too long, and I've never known a Prime Minister being forced to declare confidence in a Chancellor so soon after he gave her the job. What did you do wrong?
Well, I think I've outlived a number of my predecessors in this role. I think one of them survived for only 40 days. But look, Keira and me are a strong team working together.
Do you accept you made the odd mistake?
Well, look, I'm trying to turn around this economy. It's not an easy job. We've had 14 years of lacklustre economic performance. Working people are worse off after 14 years of Conservative government, and public services are in a mess. We're in a hurry. We want to go further and faster to deliver that growth, to improve living standards and invest in public services. And that's what Keira and me and the whole government are determined to do.
Chancellor, very good to see you.
Thank you.
So there's a ton of stuff to chew over. I think I might sort of start with something which sort of some people may have noticed and been slightly surprised by, which is she basically confirmed, she couldn't say how much, but public money would be going into the redevelopment of Old Trafford. Manchester United, what, the richest club in the world? Jim Ratcliffe, co-owner, probably the wealthiest person in Britain. I mean, should any public money be going to redevelop Old Trafford?
Absolutely not. There are areas of football where I'd love to see money invested, particularly at the bottom of the football pyramid, the Barrow Towns, the Accrington Stanleys, who are really at the heart of deprived communities where a small government investment, we've seen Bury FC, a small government investment, can revitalise a left-behind town. The idea that, you know, Manchester United is not even the best club in Manchester. The idea that we should be funneling money into the richest club in the world is just shows you've got all your economic priorities. And also, what I don't like, it's like chucking a bone to us Northerners. Oh, they like football. We're chucking something on football and they're happy. No, I don't want Manchester United to get cash. I want real jobs, transport infrastructure across the north of England that can make the communities in the north grow in a way that the government seems so focused on in doing in the south.
I mean, there's literally nothing wrong, is there, with redeveloping Old Trafford, Faiza, but it's not really levelling up. It shouldn't really get public money, should it?
No, I agree. I would say, though, my husband's a Man United fan, so I would disagree with you.
I'm a Liverpool fan, so I reserve the right to be.
They're having a hard time right now. But I would say no. I mean, there's so much that public money is needed for. And I think, you know, listening to her there and listening to just the mantra of growth over the last few months is, you know, it sounds a lot like trickle-down economics because she talks a lot about raising living standards, but how? How is Runway 3, probably in like 20 years' time, if it happens, really going to result in increasing living standards in this moment? And remember as well that actually most of the consumption that's going into the airports now, most of where people are going is not business travel, it's leisure travel abroad. So there's not as much people coming as people going. So it's actually not even a great growth strategy. So I think there's just too much like vibes and not enough like actually how are people's lives going to improve.
And it was also this weird thing, I don't know if you heard her say, but she was talking about the sort of freight aspect of, you know, expanding Heathrow. But then she talked about, you know, smoked salmon and Scotch whisky, which, I mean, it's great. We want a thriving smoked salmon and Scotch whisky industry, but it ain't going to do all that much for, you know, the North East, for example.
I think the problem is that they just started really badly with the budget, and now my concern is also that it's not just private investment, it's also actually the social infrastructure. It is things like education and public spending, and they've really locked themselves into a fiscal straitjacket on that.
And also, like, I mean, the only thing I'd say is it's also so long-term, and what people really care about is how am I going to pay the mortgage this month? And to talk about what may or may not happen in 10 years, it's far too long-term. We have an economic crisis now caused in Downing Street, which the government desperately needs to address. And I think that's what I'm really disappointed about is, you know, it's jam tomorrow, but not even tomorrow, it's in 10 years' time. And that isn't going to help families struggling now. Well,
we're going to come back and talk about some of the measures which might spur growth a bit sooner than that. But I'm delighted to be joined by Mohamed El-Erian, who is currently the president of Queen's College, Cambridge, chief economic advisor, the financial giant Allianz, used to run PIMCO, the biggest bond investor in the world. Mohamed, good to see you. This package was to an extent accelerated and made more urgent by what happened to UK government bonds only a matter of a couple of weeks ago, when bond prices fell and therefore the interest rate the government pays rose very significantly in a way that really worried the Treasury. Now, part of that spike was due to what was happening in America, the apparent inflationary consequences, but some of it was down to investors' concerns that the British economy isn't growing fast enough. So the question I just want to start with is what you heard today. Do you think it will do enough to get the growth rate up, or at least give investors confidence that these years of British stagnation may come to an end?
Robert, thank you for having me. The immediate market verdict was to bring down UK interest rates and to narrow the differential with rates elsewhere. That is a measure of risk spread, of sovereign risk. So the immediate verdict was favorable at the margin. More generally, the challenge that the government has is that for 24 of the last 30 years, we've come bottom of the league on investment in the G7. The last time we were average was in the early 90s. Why? Because every time we come to invest, the argument is it's going to take too long, the benefits aren't going to accrue quickly enough to everybody, and we don't invest. And the cumulative effect of not investing is low productivity, low growth. Let me leave you with the last number, Robert, if I may. Since 1991, US productivity has gone up 80%. Ours has gone up 40%. So we have a fundamental problem that has been many decades in the making and will not be solved quickly. It simply cannot be solved quickly.
I mean, it certainly can't be solved quickly, but I suppose, you know, the thing that slightly, I suppose, concerned me was although we got some, you know, sort of, what's the best way of putting it? Sensational is slightly overdoing it, but some sort of flagship projects given the nudge, whether it's the Oxford and Cambridge supercluster or Heathrow. I didn't emerge today thinking they've got a much more coherent general framework for investment. Were you more encouraged than I may have been?
I was, because I frame it differently. I frame it as follows. They are taking a number of steps to release the constraints on the current growth engine, what the Prime Minister a few months ago called releasing the brakes. That is planning, regulation. All that speaks to simply allowing the existing engines to operate better. Then there's a second set of policies aimed at creating new engines. The Oxford and Cambridge hub, the infrastructure investments, Heathrow, the third runway, all that is aimed at creating new engines. And then the third element, and you touched on it in your questions about our relationship with the European Union, is to create better trading relations so that we have two things: a bigger market to offer to private sector firms, and also to be better at attracting foreign direct investment. So I think there is coherence there. I just wish they would frame it in a way that people will understand, rather than throw all the measures.
Well, I think there's so much more I need to discuss or drill down on with you, in particular this issue of what kind of better relationship economically we can have with the EU. So I'm going to come back to you in just a minute, Mohamed, and to you at home, come back in a minute or two, because, as I say, some of the big questions will be answered with Mohamed and Jake and Faiza. See you in a minute.
Thank you. Welcome to the break. #Peston. We're talking about a change of heart, particularly today from Peter Mandelson, who once described Donald Trump as a danger to the world, calling him little short of a white nationalist and a racist. But today on Fox News, he had somewhat of a change of heart. I consider my remarks about President Trump as ill-judged and wrong. Do you believe him?
Well, no, I actually think Peter Mandelson will be a very good ambassador to the United States if appointed. It is a catastrophic failure of statecraft for the Prime Minister to have not sorted out the Americans after Trump's election that they would have him. He made lots of silly comments, but lots of people have, about Donald Trump. Slightly nationally humiliating that he sort of had to go on bended knee and apologise. But if he gets over the line, I do think he will be good for Britain's relationship
Faiza,
with the US.
change your mind for any prize?
Who knows? I mean, he's probably the right person to, cozy up with Trump, in the sense that he's willing to forget any of those values and morals.
We've had a few other change of hearts. Keir Starmer changed his mind about Jeremy Corbyn. Did you believe him the first time round?
And Brexit.
And Brexit?
I actually sort of did believe him, and I think it's been a huge disappointment for many.
Did he come and campaign with you back in 2019?
100%. He tweeted about how brilliant I was.
And with Jeremy Corbyn?
Jeremy Corbyn came once, Keir Starmer came twice.
Mark Zuckerberg, watch the video?
Sure.
That's a pretty big change of heart. Or do you think that's what he always thought?
No, I think corporate America could see the way the wind was blowing and they got behind it.
It's a bit harsh to bring this up again, but he did change his mind about tuition fees.
Do you know what? It's just it's just politicians seem to often have a change of heart. It's so rare to have that kind of conviction. And
do you think you can in politics just say, actually, do you know what? I did think Trump was that. I do think it, but I want to work with him.
I think the sad thing is that you probably if you do that, you're not going to get very far.
Look, I think the public like that. I think people who, we all make mistakes, admit it, tell people you're wrong, move on.
Have
I
you?
think that's the best way. I've made so many mistakes.
What's the cracker of them all?
Coming on Peston and knowing you're going to talk about your mistakes and not thinking which one you talk about.
Backing Liz Truss? Did you regret that?
Look, my job under Liz Truss was to make sure the Conservative Party survived, and we did. I was chairman. I wasn't involved in the Treasury or policy, so
This
the
is
job I
a
had to do, I did.
politician's answer.
Well, it's
Yeah.
not. I mean, look,
Mate, my mortgage
Liz
went up
made lots of
massively.
mistakes, but they weren't on my behalf.
Faiza, biggest mistake ever in 5 seconds?
Oh, gosh. What do I say? I mean, probably running again.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
God. OK, bye.
Welcome back. Much more on Rachel Reeves' economic reset in a minute. But first, Anushka.
Thank you. We heard a lot from the Chancellor today about productivity, which looks at the amount of economic output we produce relative to the effort we put in. And it can be measured by dividing total GDP by hours worked. So this is productivity over time. It rose very quickly from the 1960s all the way up to 2008. But since the financial crash up here, it has been very sluggish, which is bad news because the Resolution Foundation have shown that productivity is a key driver of wage growth in yellow. So poor productivity helps explain the problem with wages I showed you earlier. Can Rachel Reeves change things on productivity to deliver growth? In particular, can she close this gap? The IMF's estimates for our growth rate in 2029 and the much faster rate in the US. Now, the Resolution Foundation thinks that some measures can make a difference. They say infrastructure projects actually announced before today, including through GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund, could add 0.18% to that. They're quite cautious about the initial plans to build 1.5 million homes. They think that will have an impact, but it focuses a bit too much on unaffordable areas, which are not always high growth. If that plan is tweaked to focus on areas that efficiently connect people to jobs, and we did get some of that today, they think that could mean 0.14% from housing. Trade is another area that could have an impact, a bit limited. Deals with India or the US are very uncertain. And we have big red lines, as Robert was saying, with our biggest trading partner, the EU. Interestingly, if we soften those, if we did enter a customs union, then we would come almost in touching distance of the economy predicted to be the fastest growing. But Rachel Reeves just made clear to Robert that she won't do that. So can the new announcements today fill this gap? The Resolution Foundation say no, the policies themselves will not, but the government hopes that they could encourage more business activity that could make a difference. For this, Greg Thwaites and Emily Fry from the Resolution Foundation are our Geeks of the Week.
Thanks, Anushka. Mohamed, if I might come back to you. I mean, I don't know if you heard my interview with Rachel Reeves. In fact, I know you did because you actually referred to it just now. Forgive me. It was quite striking to me that she certainly didn't raise any objections in principle to rejoining the customs union. She simply said she doesn't want to break their manifesto commitment not to. I mean, in your view, is this something that any sensible government looking to increase the growth rate ought to do? Should we rejoin the customs union and the single market?
This is one of those situations where something that's economically desirable is not politically feasible for now. So it doesn't surprise me that you got the answer that you got, because had she spoken as an economist, she would have told you, yes, that can make a big difference, but she's also a politician and she knows what the sense in the country is right now. So it is economically desirable, but it's politically not feasible.
One of the things that I've been acutely aware of in recent weeks is how little room for manoeuvre any government outside of America has at the moment, because so much of, in a sense, global economic conditions and sentiment is being determined by Donald Trump. And there is so much uncertainty about, actually what he's going to do on things like tariffs and taxes and immigration and all the rest of it. I mean, truthfully, how much are we masters of our own destiny here in the UK, given those enormous uncertainties?
We are masters of our own destiny, but we're also vulnerable to the outside world, which means we have to be even better masters. You started the interview by talking about what happened to US interest rate and how that spilled over here.
Yeah.
And we ended up by seeing UK interest rates going up more than US interest rates. So even though the shock originated in the US and had nothing to do with the UK, the vulnerability of the UK is such that we not only import the shock, but we amplify it. And the reason we amplify it is because our fundamentals are weak. Our growth is weak. We just heard about productivity lagging the US, and our fiscal situation is quite stretched. So whenever the US coughs, we will catch cold. Now, if the US decides to impose massive tariffs on us, then we will catch more than just cold.
Can I just ask on that, if you were Chancellor and Prime Minister, and obviously there is uncertainty about the scale of those tariffs. We've got the Treasury Secretary, Scott Peston, saying 2.5%. We've got Donald Trump saying it's going to be a lot more than that. But should Britain retaliate? If they impose tariffs on us, are we better to stick with our free trading approach, or should we retaliate?
So Britain should and can preempt any imposition of tariffs. We have a special relationship with the US. There are things that we can give the Trump administrations that will be conveyed as easy wins, and we can actually avoid the tariffs. Now,
can you give me an example of that, Mohamed?
Yes, better access to certain markets, and for us also to be more open to foreign direct investment in the US. So there are things we can offer. The alternative of having tariffs imposed on us and then us deciding whether we retaliate or not retaliate is far inferior to us preempting the tariffs.
Can I just ask, and I'm going to come back to you in a minute, but there's just one other question I want to ask you sort of straight away. We've seen this extraordinary market shock as investors evaluated the competition in the AI market from China's DeepSeek. Just now wearing your sort of global economist hat, my view would be what DeepSeek proves is that AI is going to be diffused faster and is probably going to be cheaper than people thought. That's good for the world, basically, isn't it?
It is. I think the shock to the US was that China is more advanced, not just in adoption, but also in innovation. And that came as a shock to the US. Now, the technology is inferior to the US technology, but it wasn't something that the US expected so quickly.
I'm going to come back to you in a minute or two. I'm very struck that Mohamed thinks that there is a negotiation that we can have with Trump to avoid tariffs on us. I mean, do you think that is a realistic proposition?
No, I think it is. I think Trump is a long-term friend and ally. We saw that in his first term with the United Kingdom. And, you know, he will want something back. I think Mohamed, much more astutely than I could, points to things we could offer. And going back, we were talking about in the Twitter break about the importance of Peter Mandelson and his appointment. He really is in the front line for Britain and our economy. And that's why, you know, we've got to hope that he succeeds in building those strong relationships. The challenge is, of course, the Labour Party itself has quite difficult relationships with the Trump White House because of things that, I mean, lots of politicians from all parties have said things. Lots of Labour politicians have said particularly egregious things, and they're now things like Secretary of State for the Foreign Office. It's quite an important role. And also, I think there is still, if you talk to people in the Republican team, as I do occasionally, there is still a lot of anger over the question of the 100 Labour activists, which is actually not unusual in terms of American elections, going over to the United States. There's some discussion in the US about whether they should seek extradition of those individuals for electoral interference. So there's a lot for the British government to do to repair relations, but it matters to everyone at home and everyone watching tonight.
I mean, it is certainly the case, Faiza, that since the election of Trump, we've seen just a sort of incredible raft of things I never thought I'd see politically and economically in my lifetime, like a president issuing a crypto meme coin to enrich himself, which is literally off the charts, extraordinary. But just on the relationship between Britain and America, we had somebody chosen to be our ambassador by Keir Starmer, plainly still fearful of something that's never happened, an American president blocking his arrival, going on Fox News today, you know, basically sort of, it was slightly embarrassing. He was saying how what a wonderful man Donald Trump is, and surely Donald Trump, being a wonderful man, wouldn't block him. I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary spectacle, isn't it, Faiza?
It is. It is embarrassing, but at the same time, I guess they're being pragmatic, because at the end of the day, Donald Trump's ego maybe likes that. And here they are fighting because they know that if growth is their main thing, if Trump does impose the tariff, then they are in trouble. And absolutely, they do need to be preemptive about it. I would say be preemptive about it, but also look to the EU, right? Because they are our closest partners and we should be trading more with them. And actually, we have to think, also have another strategy, because Trump, you just never know. You never know what he's going to do. And there's got to be a kind of other plan that makes sure that our economy can hold up.
Now, got tons more from our super brain guests, Faiza, Jake and Mohamed, in just a minute. And, you know, let's be clear, there's so much at stake, you can't afford to miss the last part. See you in a minute.
Hello, I'm on. We've got hardly any time, so I'm going to ask you something very simple. A 3-word review from each of you on Rachel Reeves' speech. Jake?
Out of depth.
Out of depth. Ooh.
Trickle-down economics.
Trickle-down economics. There you go. Perfect timing. Bye.
Welcome back. Anushka and Deep Screener, you've got more to share with us.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about regional divides, and I just wanted to show you in particular this, Jake, from IPPR North. This actually looks at Treasury spending per head on transport projects for 23-24. So that's when you were in government. More than double was spent in London, 1,321 per head compared to 615 in the north of England. Rachel Reeves talked up some of the regional projects, some of the northern projects today, but the highlights were still actually in the south. And when we asked IPPR North about that, nothing really started to close that gap. I mean, looking at that, do you think actually your government failed on the north-south divide?
Well, look, the first thing is I have quite a long relationship with sort of disagreeing with IPPR North's figures, because what they have done historically, I don't know if they've done it here, is included in the southern spending private sector investment, so they're not always comparing like with like.
Purely Treasury spending.
At least the last
Private
government
sector investment counts, though, for goodness sake.
but it's not just government spending, is the point.
This is just government
at least
spending,
the last
just to be
government
clear.
had a plan, whether you call it levelling up or the Northern Powerhouse, it had a plan. And I just haven't heard anything from Rachel Reeves, who...
No, I'm asking you about you.
I'm
asking you about you. Do you look at that and think, actually, we failed
if you're unhappy with the
North?
figures, I haven't seen the data set. I say that, you know, at least we had a plan to try and reverse it. I haven't heard anything from this government about any plan for Northern
This is
growth.
the end of your government. This was after 14 years.
Yeah, look, as I say, I have a long history of arguing with the IPPR North about their figures.
Come on.
I'd like a good look at them first.
Come on, that's real, right?
You
This
can't
is
say
Treasury
that.
spending. This is Treasury
I mean,
spending.
the level up
Okay.
plan was the word.
Faiza, I also
But
wanted
what's
to ask
the
you.
spend per capita? Because there's a
This
big
is the spend per
There's a
capita.
big difference.
This
well,
is per
a lot more
capita.
people live in
This is per
London.
capita.
This is per
than
capita.
North.
capita.
Treasury
Okay,
spending.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right, we don't have time to carry on that. But Faiza, you talked about climate, and I just wanted to ask you about that, and actually just show you this chart from Carbon Brief. It tracks emissions from aviation. You can see them dipping there in COVID. Now, this blue line into the future is where the Climate Change Committee says we should be going to stay on track for net zero. The pink line is what happens if we add another runway in Heathrow. If we added one in Gatwick and Luton as well, then we go up to here. And just to put this into perspective, Carbon Brief calculated how many trees we would need to plant to offset these emissions. Just for Heathrow, a forest so big that it would cover almost the whole of Greater London. You might not quite be able to see it there, but we'd be talking about millions and millions and millions of trees, over 140,000 of hectares. And if the other two runways went ahead, you'd be talking about 2. Faiza, do you look at this and think they are basically breaking their climate commitments here?
They are, and there's an international reputation issue here as well, right? And it's also the kind of country we want to be, right? If we're going to be the kind of country that projects like we're good on climate, hopefully doing something about living standards and the rest of it, then that actually makes us a place to invest in, right? What I really wish we'd heard more about today in detail is renewable energy, like cutting costs, a big plan on that would have been heavily
Can
tilted
anyone
towards the north.
stop them? I mean, to both of you, can anyone stop Rachel Reeves pushing ahead with this sort of
It's
stuff?
not up to her though, is it? 'Cause it's
Rebels,
Heathrow Airport.
Sadiq Khan.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Sadiq Khan's going to have something to say about it. I did see back, I think it was in 2020, that Rachel Reeves was opposing the expansion of Leeds Bradford Airport. So you never know, she might find a way to oppose this herself.
Although I think she voted for it, didn't she, in 2018?
So who voted for what?
Rachel Reeves voted for Heathrow, not
she
for
did.
trees.
She did.
not
Sorry,
for
I was distracted for a moment. But she did.
Will Boris be
She
back
was
to
in
lie
favour of
down in front
Heathrow.
of the
Keir
bulldozer?
Starmer
Was
wasn't in
again.
favour of Heathrow.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer seems to have given in on this one. Now, I want to go back to Mohamed just for a second, Mohamed, because I'd quite like just to throw forward to the end of March when we're going to get the Office for Budget Responsibility report, which is going to be yet another headache for the Chancellor, because it is, I think, inevitably now going to show that she's not meeting her fiscal rules. And all the briefing out of the Treasury is, as a result of not meeting her fiscal rules, it's going to be even tougher. She's going to be even tougher on spending, and in particular on welfare. Can I just ask you, do you think she should be so ruled by these fiscal rules that she herself made up? Is it rational to respond, particularly in terms of squeezing public spending in the short term, because at a particular moment in time she's a few billion short 5 years hence?
So because of what she's inherited, because of the history of fiscal imprudence, and because the Labour Party made so many promises in the run-up to the election, she will have no choice but to cut spending if the headroom has disappeared. In a perfect world, Robert, she wouldn't have ruled out increases in VAT. She wouldn't have ruled out increases in income taxes. She would have had a much more balanced approach to the revenue side and not overloaded the national income contributions. And then she would have had more flexibility on the expenditure side. But it is what it is. They made certain decisions that I and others warned that these will prove to be excessively constraining. And now the country is going to live with the consequences.
Now, our probable new ambassador to Washington, Peter Mandelson, who we've just been talking about, said today in that rather extraordinary interview on Fox News that he regarded Trump, I don't think this is particularly controversial, as a very, very consequential president. You've just heard from the government today that it is taking a huge risk with its climate commitments by saying it wants to build this runway. Has Trump basically blown up the global attempt to get emissions down fast enough to avoid a very serious increase in global warming?
There's two things happening in the US that I find fascinating. One is the speed with which companies that were leading on the environmental side have done a U-turn, a massive U-turn. There's something else going on that we don't talk enough about, is the emergence of a new elite, a completely different elite.
Yeah.
It comes from the tech side. It is incredibly empowered. It is wealthy, and it's gaining political influence. And I think those two things are having spillovers to other advanced economies and as well to developing countries.
I mean, it is absolutely fascinating. And one thing that I wanted to talk to the Chancellor about today, but didn't have time to because there's so much, was the extent to which Trump, saying the things he did, for example, about abolishing all moves towards increasing diversity within government and business, and now having spillovers into the UK. I mean, do you think that British institutions should sort of, in a sense, show a bit more backbone and stick with the diversity agenda?
Yeah, I do, because it's something that Trump is pushing in the US. OK, he's been elected in, but that's not what people have voted for here. I do worry, that people are looking to the US and just changing policies here on the basis of Trump. I think we should be really concerned, as Mohamed said there, about this elite and the oligarchy and the fact, I've been working on inequality for many years, and we warned for a long time about this level of wealth inequality and the impact it has on our policies, on our politics. And we see that so clearly now. And, this is why I'm really concerned about this sort of approach that completely brushes aside issues of inequality. And I do worry that we are seeing this rowback from this Labour government already, because they want to seem more in sync with Trump, whether it be climate or inequality.
Now, annoyingly, I wanted to come to you, Jake, but you'd have to tell me after the show what you wanted to say, because I'm out of time. That is it. The Chancellor told me today that she wants to build this country's first new full-length runway since the 1940s. That was the era of rationing and wholesale nationalisation. Just pointing that out. Goodbye.